Steelers Nation, the moment Pittsburgh stepped into Soldier Field for that Week 12 clash, everyone could feel that the afternoon was going to demand more than just routine football. The sky felt heavy, the crowd was roaring early, and even though the Steelers came in as slight underdogs, there was a real sense that this matchup could set the tone for the stretch run of the season. And right out of the gate, the team carried itself with a certain sharpness. The defense came out flying around. The offense looked confident enough to test Chicago deep. And for a while, it seemed like Pittsburgh might settle into one of those gritty, grinded-out performances that define a season. But as every fan knows, games like this have a way of tilting when you least expect it. And in the second half, the tide turned hard in favor of Chicago. With Aaron Rodgers sidelined, all eyes shifted to Mason Rudolph, thrown into the spotlight once again and asked to steady a team racing through adversity. And instead of easing into the game with check downs or conservative calls, he came out attacking. His very first attempt was a shot downfield, a bold attempt to set the tone and show that Pittsburgh wasn't there to tiptoe their way through the afternoon. He wanted to give DK Metcalf a chance to make an early statement, trusting the matchup and betting on his new star receiver to win in the air. But instead of energizing the offense, the moment flipped the stadium on its head. Nashon Wright soared into the frame, twisted his body midair, and came down with an interception that lit up Chicago's crowd. One throw, one gamble, and suddenly the whole mood of the game shifted. Yet even with that early setback, Rudolph never flinched. When he talked after the game, he made it clear he had no regrets about the decision. He read the look pre-snap, he liked the leverage, and he believed in Metcalf enough to give him a chance even with tight coverage. It wasn't a reckless launch into a hopeless window. It was a calculated shot rooted in trust, confidence, and the belief that his playmaker could turn a contested ball into a spark for the team. And the way he talked about it, you could tell he'd take that chance again without thinking twice. In his mind, that's the kind of aggression an offense needs to show if it wants to strike early and force a defense to react. It just so happened that Chicago made the better play. But that was only one moment in a game filled with complications. As the snaps piled up, Rudolph faced pressure that seemed to surge from every angle. On one particular play action, he looked ready to fire a check down to keep the chains moving, but Chicago peeled off and erased the option at the last second. He pulled the ball back, tried to reset, and that hesitation gave the defense the window they needed. The hit knocked the ball loose, the stadium erupted again, and Pittsburgh had to swallow another tough swing of momentum. Rudolph later admitted he needed to secure the ball better in that situation, but it wasn't the kind of turnover that comes from carelessness. It was the kind that comes from a defense timing everything perfectly and forcing a quarterback into a half-second of doubt. Through it all, the Steelers' offense struggled to string together drives. There were flashes of rhythm, moments when it looked like they were close to breaking through, but consistency never arrived. Even when they fought back with big plays here and there, too many drives stalled before they could truly take control. The defense, on the other hand, had its own roller coaster afternoon. They produced highlights, including another defensive touchdown that kept the team alive, but they also allowed Chicago to move the ball far, too comfortably. Every time the Steelers clawed back within striking distance, the Bears answered, leaning on Caleb Williams and a scheme that kept finding open grass in the middle of the field. That theme became even more concerning after the game, when Patrick Queen opened up about how difficult some of the defensive calls were for the players to execute. He talked about situations where he and other underneath defenders were asked to handle responsibilities that were almost impossible with the route combination Chicago was running. You could hear the frustration in his voice as he described trying to play the run, drop into space, and account for multiple threats coming from different angles all at once. It painted a picture of a defense that wasn't just getting beaten physically, but one that was being stretched strategically. For a player of Queen's caliber to speak openly about schematic issues says a lot about what unfolded on that field. And it wasn't just the coverage that took a hit. Injuries added to the mess, making the road even harder. Joey Porter Jr., who was battling through multiple tweaks already during the game, eventually went down with a hip flexor that ended his afternoon. Before that, he even snagged an interception that would have been a huge momentum swing, only for it to be erased by a penalty. It was the kind of sequence that perfectly summarized the entire day. A great individual play overshadowed by something that wiped it away before the team could benefit from it. Broderick Jones also exited with a stinger, leaving the offensive line scrambling to adjust. Losing key starters in a game that was already a battle didn't just hurt in the moment. It created even more uncertainty for the road ahead. And that's where things start to feel heavier for Pittsburgh. The loss didn't just drop them to 6 wins and 5 losses on the season. It pushed them out of the top spot in the division, something that had felt within reach for weeks. Suddenly, the once clear path toward the postseason became foggy, with tougher opponents looming and little margin for error. The mistakes, the communication breakdowns, the missed opportunities, each one matters more now than ever. The team can't afford to keep letting games slip away the way this one did. Through all of this, the focus keeps circling back to Rudolph. Stepping in at quarterback under these conditions is no easy task, and considering the pressure, the injuries around him, and the weight of the moment, it's fair to ask how fans should grade his performance. He completed well over 3/4 of his passes, protected the ball outside of 2 tough turnovers, and maintained composure through every chaotic swing of the game. But statistics only tell part of the story. What stands out more is the way he carried himself, the way he kept taking chances, and the way he handled the adversity lining up against him. And while the team around him struggled, his willingness to stand in, attack downfield, and trust his weapons set a tone that shouldn't be ignored. Whether that earns him a high grade or a more measured one depends on how each fan weighs those elements. But there's no question he competed with resilience in a game that pushed Pittsburgh to its limits. Steelers Nation, as we roll into this second part, it becomes impossible to ignore how deeply this matchup in Chicago exposed the layers of tension sitting beneath the surface of Pittsburgh's season. The score alone does not capture the full weight of what unfolded. This was a game where every drive felt like it carried a hidden message about where the team stands, what still needs fixing, and how the remaining weeks could define the identity of the entire year. And if there was one unit that walked off that field with more questions than answers, it was the defense. For stretches, the defense looked like it might seize control the way Pittsburgh's defenses have done in so many seasons before, with instinct, force, and that familiar disruptive swagger. They produced yet another defensive touchdown, something that should have given them enough momentum to tilt the matchup their way. But every spark was met with Chicago extinguishing it immediately, slicing through soft spots in coverage and forcing Pittsburgh to chase the game instead of dictating it. Caleb Williams looked far too comfortable, stepping into throws like he was running practice reps rather than dealing with a defense full of experienced, high-caliber starters. And that comfort came from something the players themselves started talking about afterward. The spacing, the calls, the responsibilities that kept putting linebackers and safeties in impossible situations. Patrick Queen's comments weren't angry outbursts. They were observant, specific, and almost tired in tone, as if he had been dealing with these same structural problems for much longer than one frustrating afternoon. When he described trying to cover 2 routes at once while also reacting to the run, you could hear just how stretched he felt play after play. He wasn't pointing fingers at teammates. He wasn't blaming lack of effort. He was talking about alignment, assignments, and how often defenders found themselves reacting a step too late because the scheme didn't match what Chicago was showing. When a player with Queen's instincts is forced into that kind of reactive mode, it becomes clear the approach itself needs adjusting. And the film only reinforced what he said. Over and over, the middle of the field was left exposed, sometimes by a half step, sometimes by 5 yards, but always in a way that invited Chicago to take advantage. When Williams threaded throws between levels, the linebackers were often seen turning in multiple directions at once, try to pick up crossers while also collapsing on the run fits. And those hashmark routes Queen mentioned created exact scenarios where defenders were stuck choosing which threat to commit to. It was like watching a puzzle being solved by one side while the other side kept being handed the wrong pieces. The concerning part is that this issue is not new. It has been building across multiple seasons. Fans have seen these same windows open repeatedly, and nothing seems to change. That is why the frustration after this particular game felt sharper than usual. Not because of one blown coverage or one missed adjustment, but because the problems have been echoing year after year. It becomes hard to keep blaming execution when the same vulnerabilities appear against different opponents, under different circumstances, and with different players on the field. The defensive coaching dynamic is part of that conversation. The relationship between the coordinator calling the plays and the head coach contributing to the defensive structure complicates how quickly or aggressively changes can be made. When both voices shape the defensive identity, adjustments become slower and accountability becomes blurred. If the philosophy itself needs a tune-up, someone has to step forward and guide that process. But the question is whether anyone on the staff is willing to overhaul something that has been in place for so long. The players sense that tension, and fans sense it too. On top of the schematic concerns, the injuries only magnified the problems. Losing Joey Porter Jr. in a game where the defense already struggled to contain passing windows was a blow that couldn't be masked. His absence forced rotations that did not match well with Chicago's tempo or route structure. Before leaving, he had fought through multiple knocks, including a moment where he briefly exited after a leg issue, only to return and make what should have been a highlight turnover. That interception would have flipped momentum entirely, but it got wiped out by a penalty away from the ball. Plays like that sap the emotional energy of a defense. You give maximum effort when your individual battle, steal the ball, and still walk away with nothing to show for it. Then the injury takes you out for good, and suddenly the secondary is stretched even thinner. Broderick Jones' injury hit the offense in a different way. Losing your left tackle in the middle of a close game throws the entire protection plan into chaos, especially when your backup hasn't seen many meaningful snaps. Suddenly, Rudolph had pressure arriving from angles that had been secure earlier in the game, and the offense lost the rhythm it was trying so hard to build. When Jones slammed his helmet on the sideline, that wasn't just frustration, it was the realization that his absence had shifted the entire structure of the offensive line at the worst possible moment. These injuries, combined with the defensive breakdowns and the offensive inconsistencies, created a perfect storm that left Pittsburgh scrambling to stay afloat. And yet, in the middle of all this turbulence, the team still found ways to punch back. That resilience is worth noting because it shows the players are not quitting on the season, not letting setbacks turn into excuses. But effort alone cannot carry a team through the final stretch of a playoff race. They need clarity, adaptation, and a shift in how the game is managed on both sides of the ball. The weight of falling behind in the division adds even more urgency. The margin for error has disappeared. Every mistake becomes magnified now. Every lost rep, every blown read. The North is unforgiving, and slipping from the top spot forces Pittsburgh into a position where they have to chase instead of hold their ground. And chasing becomes even harder when the issues on the field are systemic rather than situational. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and hit the like button on this video. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the news in the comments below. The Steelers' locker room is buzzing with whispers that could shake the NFL landscape. Insiders hint at what might be the most dramatic roster overhaul in recent memory. 3 high-profile arrivals, 3 departures that have left fans and pundits stunned, and a surprise trade that no one saw coming. The rumor mill suggests this isn't just a casual shakeup. It's a full-blown strategic pivot, with the front office signaling a willingness to take risks in pursuit of long-term dominance. Sources close to the team describe a flurry of activity behind the scenes. The newcomers, reportedly bringing a mix of veteran savvy and young talent, are said to be game-changers who could redefine the Steelers' style on both sides of the ball. Meanwhile, those leaving have generated their own share of speculation. Some are moving on to chase opportunities elsewhere, while others may have been deemed surplus to the team's bold new vision. The chatter around the surprise trade is even more tantalizing. Details are scarce, but the move is being described as both shocking and calculated, a gamble that could either pay off spectacularly or backfire. Fans have flooded social media with theories. debating how the arrivals will mesh with the existing roster and whether the departures were inevitable or a sudden shock. Pundits are weighing in, suggesting that the Steelers' front office is clearly signaling a new era, one where adaptability and audacity might take precedence over tradition. Analysts speculate on the hidden strategy, with some pointing to potential shifts in offensive schemes and defensive alignments. Others wonder if this is an early indicator of a rebuild or a bold push to contend at the highest level immediately. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The Steelers' roster is no longer recognizable to those who followed it closely. Every new signing, every departure, every trade whispers a story of ambition, calculation, and surprise. Rumors are swirling, insiders are leaking hints, and fans are bracing for an opening chapter that could redefine the team's identity. The Steelers might not just be reshaping a roster. They could be setting the stage for a new era of unpredictability in the NFL. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Pittsburgh Steelers, make sure to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and give this video a like. We always look forward to hearing your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.